Y'all been giving some thought to the wall over here? Hope you have. Starting next week, we're going to have a series on the book of Galatians, and I'll be revealing that to you in that series. So just keep thinking about it. Some of you have figured it out because you told me, so keep it up. But today, since this is Labor Day weekend, we're going to be talking about that. We all have either worked, are going to work, or have retired from work. But as pointed out, we don't retire from being a Christian. When our country was colonized, things were quite a bit different than they are today. Culture has changed. I want to mention to you two of the earliest settlements, Jamestown and Plymouth Rock. Both of those early colonizations almost failed because they both had a poor work ethic. And I think we can see that in the world in which we live today, there is a pretty poor work ethic. So there's some similarity. The Jamestown settlement was made up of mostly rich people who could afford to pay the passage to come to America. Well, when they got to America, they didn't have something that they had before, and that was servants. You know, before they came to America and settled in Jamestown, they had servants to do all their work. But once they got to Jamestown, they didn't have any servants. They had to do the work. They didn't know much about it because they hadn't done much. The Pilgrims, they were more of a middle class of people. And when they got here, they knew what it was to work, but they had a problem because they had made an agreement with England before they left that they would live under a socialist form of government. And since everybody got an equal share of everything, the incentive to work wasn't that great, because they knew whether they worked or not, they were going to get the same thing. And so after 2 years of that, Governor Bradford decided enough is enough. And so what he did was he gave each of the Pilgrims a piece of land. It was their responsibility to do with that piece of land whatever they wanted to do. Well, since they had their own land, and it was no longer everybody getting the same thing, that was an incentive for them to do some work. And the more you worked, the better you came out in the end. The better your harvest. And so, the Pilgrim colony that was in the process of failing once Governor Bradford got rid of the socialism idea, it began to flourish. And the Pilgrims, because they were willing to work, were able to turn things around. The Pilgrims also had another advantage over those of Jamestown. Unlike the citizens of Jamestown, the Pilgrims believed in God and the Bible. And they knew what the Bible said about work. That was a big help to them. In fact, one of the things they believed the Bible said about work was that work was ordained by God. Remember the stories in Genesis 1 and 2, how that God Himself had actually worked and created all of this. In 6 days, He worked and He rested on the seventh. Listen to these words from Ephesians chapter 6. And I'm going to use the words that are actually in the Bible, but you could think, when I say the word slave, you could think of employee, and when I say the word master, you could think of employer. So, anyway, this is what it says, verses 5 through 9. Slaves, be obedient to those who are your masters, according to the flesh, with fear and trembling, in the sincerity of your heart as to Christ, not by way of eye service as men pleasers, but as slaves of Christ, doing the will of God from your heart. With good will render service as to the Lord and not to men, knowing that whatever good thing each one does, this he will receive back from the Lord, whether slave or free. And masters, do the same thing to them, and give up threatening, knowing that both their master and yours is in heaven, and there is no partiality with him. So the Pilgrims recognized that God knew something about work himself. And so they began to work. And they began to rest on the seventh day. And they began to see things turn around. They felt if God worked at creating the world, then work had to be a good thing. The Pilgrims also acknowledged that work was not a punishment. Now they knew that, when Adam and Eve got kicked out of the Garden of Eden, God said you're going to have to work for your living. But they didn't see it as a punishment. They also knew Ecclesiastes 2:24 and 25, which says, there is nothing better for a man than to eat and drink and tell himself that his labor is good. This also I have seen that it is from the hand of God. For who can eat and who can have employment without him? And the third thing that the Pilgrims realized from the Bible was that God believed that work was important. In verses 5 and 7 of Ephesians 6, it tells us that God wanted us to do our work as if we were doing it for him. And I think that's the important concept we need to get this morning. That whatever work you've done or you are going to do or you are doing now, it's a work that is really for God. And, no matter who our boss is on this earth, God is our boss for whatever we do and however we work. So once the biblical view of manual labor was put into practice by the Pilgrims, they developed something that they called the Protestant work ethic. Once this idea of capitalism took root, they began to grow rapidly in wealth and in everything else because they realized the benefits of doing the job well. Let me illustrate it this way. This will help us understand the distinctiveness of capitalism, which is what we believe here in this country. We're going to compare some world concepts in dealing with working and money, okay? For example, socialism. Socialism is when you have two cows. The government takes one cow and gives it to your neighbor. That's socialism. Then there's communism. In communism, you have two cows. The government takes both of them and then shoots you. I messed up, sorry. Let me start over with communism. In communism, you have two cows. The government takes both of the cows and then gives you some milk. Okay? The way I got ahead of myself, I skipped a line. Nazism, okay? Under Hitler. You have two cows, the government takes both of them and shoots you. That's Nazi. Okay. So there's a difference between communism and Nazism a little bit there. In bureaucracy, you have two cows, the government takes both, shoots one, milks one, and pours the milk down the drain. I was hoping Dick would be here to hear that one. Capitalism, of course, is the one we understand the best because that's the system we live under. Under capitalism, you have two cows, you sell one, and you buy a bull. And then you increase your herd. That's capitalism. Capitalism is one of the most efficient forms of generating wealth that we know. And that's why we think it's a pretty good system. Under capitalism, we have a good, strong, influential country in which to live. But when Christianity and our faith is removed from capitalism, it's not that great. Because greed and selfishness take over. And I think when we look around, that's what we're seeing happening in our country. See, where has the faith gone? Where has the Christianity gone? Where has religion gone? It's been replaced by greed and selfishness. And so even in the best system there is, capitalism, without Christ, you're going to see all kinds of evil taking over. What happens when Christianity and faith is taken out of capitalism is you end up with workers who really don't care anything at all about the company they work for. They don't care if the company makes any money, or even if the company survives. All they care about is that they get a raise every time one's due, and they get more benefits added on to what they already have, and they receive what they feel they deserve. They deserve the advantages of capitalism, but rarely do they want the restraints of faith and of Christ involved in the process. And so what happens is capitalism's greatest weaknesses are the same things that plague us in our lives. Greed and selfishness takes over. Greed and selfishness are very powerful motivators. If it's their money or their power, and if it can be had, they're going to do whatever it takes to have it. That's just the way it is in this world because of sin. But the Bible calls it differently. The Bible says this: I call you to be different. I've called you to be salt and light in the world that is often foul-tasting and dark. We need to spice up this world. We need to light up this darkness. That's what God says. Be salt. Be light. Be different. Help greedy and selfish people see the need. Change their ways. He calls us to live in such a way that these sins will not control us. Of course, the most obvious people to have problems with selfishness and greed would be the rich, right? So God tells them this. He says, don't be arrogant. Do not put your hope in wealth, which is so uncertain, but put your hope in God, who richly provides us with everything for our enjoyment. Command them to do good, to be rich in good deeds, and to be generous, and to be willing to share. In this way, they will lay up for themselves as a firm foundation for the coming age, so that they may take hold of the life that is truly life. 1 Timothy 6, verses 17 through 19. So basically what God is telling the rich is this: use your money for me. Because we know it's not money that's evil, it's the love of money, the greed of money, selfishness that money brings. After all, wealth comes from God, doesn't it? 1 Chronicles 29:12 says this: wealth and honor come from God. God says, use your money for me. You can control your selfishness. You can control your greed if you're using it for me. So if money is causing you to stumble in greediness and selfishness, then get rid of your money. Give it to God. And He'll help it. He'll help you get over those things that cause you to fall. I think dealing with our selfishness and greed isn't just a problem for the rich, however. I think we have a problem with that too. If there's any rich here, I'm not talking to you at the moment. I'm talking to us. You don't have a lot. Ephesians 4:28 says, "He who has been stealing must steal no longer, but must work, doing something useful with your hands, that he may have something to share with those in need." A thief is the ultimate example of greed. If you have something valuable, he wants it. And if that thief becomes a Christian, how can he change his lifetime of selfishness and stealing from others? How can he overcome the power of greed that has controlled him for so long? Well, the Bible says he could go out and get a job, work with his hands, do what God has gifted him to do, the talents and abilities that he has, rather than stealing from people. It doesn't make any difference who you are, really. God calls you to live your life differently as a Christian. One of the most significant areas of your life you can do that is where you work. Where you work may be your mission field. Where you work may be your best opportunity to share Christ with people. So do it. Take the advice of Ephesians 6, verse 7, which says, "Serve wholeheartedly as if you were serving the Lord and not men." In other words, do your job as you're doing it for Jesus, rather than doing it for your boss. And we can't have a sermon on work without looking at Colossians 3:23. It says this, "Whatever you do, work at it with all your heart, as working for the Lord, not for men." If you're a Christian, you work for God. And you know what? While you're working for God, you're building up eternal benefits. If you belong to Jesus Christ, you are called to do whatever you do for the glory of God, because you're working for Him. If you think your job is boring, then you're not working for the Lord. You see, it's how you view what you're doing and why you're doing it that's important. If we make Him our employer, our boss, and if we do everything we do for Him, it can't be boring, because we're doing it for Him. If you were to change your focus and not your job would improve so much, and you would be able to make a bigger contribution, because you would realize you're not working for your boss, you're working for Him.
Oh, yes. Thank you.
God made America great. And He made it great because Americans learned the value of godly labor and serving a boss much higher than your boss on earth. God can do the same thing in our lives if we make Him our employer. And if everything that we do is done for Him, do that, others can't help but notice. You know, they're goofing off, they're cutting corners at work, but you're not. That's going to be noticed. And that'll give you an opportunity to say something for God. Tell them that you're working for Him. And then they even want to know why you're working that way. Why you're not cutting corners. Why you're not slacking off when the boss isn't looking. Well, you can tell them, my boss is always looking. My boss is always seeing what I do. I'm working for someone up there. So on this Labor Day weekend, remember God is your boss. Whatever you do for Him. We're going to have an invitation song here. And it's an opportunity for you to just consider how you have been as an employee. How you are working. Or maybe you are a boss. You know, maybe you need to consider how you treat your employees. You know, God has certainly blessed us over and over again as our boss, given us much more than what we deserve. We ought to work for Him better than what we have. So if you need to make a decision about that, we pray you will as we sing our invitation song. Let's stand.